welcome to the Coaching Uncovered podcast. My name is Brent Davis, and this is my podcast that I get to talk to coaches about coaching, and I love doing it. So really excited about today's guest again. So we've got an Australian golf professional on again, Steve Giuliano. Thanks for coming in, Steve, and talking to me.
Thanks for having me, buddy. Good morning.
It's been too long between us having a conversation. I enjoy catching up with you and sharing your ideas. You do a great job of what you do out there, so I'm keen to dive in today and see what we come up with.
Good stuff. Let's get cracking.
So talk me through, you went through your traineeship around about the same time as I did. So you've been a PGA professional for 20 years, close to 20 years now?
Yeah, spot on. I think my graduation was 99.
Yeah, so you're about the same time as me. Tell me about where you started in Australia. You were at Sanctuary Lakes first up. Is that kind of where you built up your coaching to start with?
Yeah, I mean, even before that, I did my traineeship at Latrobe Golf Club. That was actually where I was a junior member, worked there, did my traineeship there, and started coaching there. That was kind of my first coaching job in, shortly after my traineeship. Actually, I was coaching during my traineeship, but certainly got into coaching a lot more whilst I was there. And kind of at the same time, I started working at Sanctuary Lakes as well at that academy. So I was kind of had two positions there, and eventually transitioned all the way to Sanctuary Lakes, where I worked with Brett LeBrock. I don't know if you remember him. Worked with him at his academy for about 10 years. So I was the first sort of 10 years out of my traineeship.
So how much of an influence did Brett have on your coaching? He's obviously fairly high profile at that stage and was setting up his own kind of coaching programs and academies, which is probably in Australia was at that stage was probably brand new. So definitely. how much of an influence did he have on your coaching?
Pretty big, I think, for a number of different reasons. He was definitely doing different things in the industry back then. He wasn't that interested in one-to-one coaching, on the whole. I mean, he certainly did it, but it was all about bigger programs, having students travel in from, other countries such as Asia to come and, do long-term stays and full-time programs and things like that. And I definitely think he shook up a little bit of the industry. I definitely think he made the PGA think a little bit more about, their model, which ultimately was a good thing for the PGA. But there weren't too many pros at that time, at that age, that were traveling to the US, maybe none in Australia, and working for a high-profile academy like he was, which was Rick Smith. And, he had contacts with Jim McLean and whatnot. So he was a big influence because I was able to go to the States, really just hang out with him and watch him coach. And we did lots of trips together early on where we'd go to Ledbetter's and, I'd spent a month at a time at Rick Smith, and we'd go down to Jim McLean's, which was around the corner, and spend, a week or so there with coaches when I did those early trips to the US when I finished mine. So he just made me think a little bit more about, if you want to grow and be as good a coach as you can, you should spread your wings and try and learn from the best. And, I'd felt I'd spent a good amount of time with the top coaches in Australia. David Milne, Steve Bann, Dale Lynch, whether that was watching them teach or it was just actually getting coached from them, which was also great. And, Ross Herbert and these guys. It was sort of time to kind of, okay, what else is out there? And Brett sort of was a guy who was already doing that and was super encouraging for me to come along and, and learn from him and the guys around him.
It's a common theme coming up that the successful coaches now spent time with good coaches early on in their career, and I think what you're saying there is you did spend time with coaches and successful coaches, and you pick up so much from spending time with those guys. I think it's great that you spent that time with you. So tell me about spending time in the States. How was that? How exciting was that to spend time with those huge names in the coaching industry?
Yeah, I mean, it was, even to this day, those were really early days for me. Like, literally just finished my traineeship and hopped on a plane 3 months later to spend a month in the US. I can definitely still remember I went over with a really good buddy of mine, Grant Gibson, who you might remember. He's in Hong Kong now. He's been there forever. and we were freezing. It was still kind of coming off the back of the winter, and we'd be on the range like freezing, and I'd have my video camera. I filmed everything, taking notes. I remember taking notes on not just what they were doing, but the words that they were saying of encouragement. I mean, I had this whole page of like buzzwords, and it was just, it was the most rawest time for me, because when you're starting out, everything is gold, like everything is gospel. And that's what I remember most about those experiences. And interestingly, years later, I mean, they did golf schools there that would go for 3 days and weeks, and so all that was so new. So it wasn't just, I mean, the experience of being over there for sure, but the way that they delivered to the student was a very different type of instruction to what I'd ever experienced in Australia. The way that they were very hands-on, the way they analysed. They just did it quite differently in the US. There's a lot more hype about what they do. Rick Smith at the time, although a lot of people listening to this probably wouldn't have heard of Rick Smith at the time. He was actually, he was in that top 5 list of coaches. It was like Haney and Butch Harmon and Ledbetter and McLean and Rick Smith, and he was working with Mickelson and Lee Jansen at the time, who'd won 2 US Opens around those kind of that mid-90s period, I believe. And he'd fly up and work with Gary Nicholas, and Jack was there with his son. So there was a lot of really cool experiences that pretty priceless. When you think about them, and I've still got all the videos that I took back then, and I still reference them even now, especially when I'm delivering short game stuff. It was really cool.
It is, and I think those high profile coaches, their stuff still stands up. They've obviously changed and improved over time, but their content still stands up. But how with those coaches in the US, how much of it is them selling their product as opposed to being the best the best quality golf coach, so to speak? How much do they just sell the product as opposed to being the best golf coach?
It's a good question. Rick definitely came across more in that light. And I can't speak for all the other coaches because I just haven't spent enough time with them. But I mean, certainly in the US, marketing is a big part of things, and it looks like they're always trying to stand out, from the next guy beside them, whether that's with a product or how they teach or whatever. There's definitely that side of it, but I definitely found Rick to be a pretty hyped up guy. He was a very outgoing guy. But there was an older guy that worked for Rick named Henry Young, and I kind of over time, spending a lot more time at that academy and watching him teach, he was kind of the brains to me. He had like all of the really deep knowledge. So if you're ever going to have a conversation, you'd sit down with Henry, and he was like a godfather of. He had lots of stories. Very smart guy. He could answer all your questions really thoroughly, whereas Rick was a little bit more blasé. He was a little bit more about the hype, and that's just the way it was at that particular place. But I can't comment too much about other coaches. But I think just in general that you see that as a little bit of a common theme. I mean, as good as the coaches are there, and I think as we get deeper into like social media, and a lot of these coaches are bringing out their content online through certifications. You figure out the guys that run really deep, just by their delivery and I guess what content they're putting out there. And you also figure out the guys that might have a little bit more hype around what they do and maybe don't run as deep. And I'm not saying one is way better than the other. It's just, you choose who you want to learn from at the end of the day. And who you think is going to help your coaching, right?
That makes sense, but I've always thought as Australian golf coaches are pretty well trained in the theory of golf swing and golf coaching. I think we're top of the tree when it comes to that understanding of what golf swing actually is. But I don't think we sell ourselves very well as golf coaches in Australia, and I think that's a problem, and I think it's changing. I think people coming out now into full-time coaching roles have been proving that, but I think it's always been a problem over the years that we don't sell ourselves as Australian coaches very well.
Agree. And no, I would agree. I think the younger guys are doing a way better job because it's just, it's what they grew up with. They're growing up with Facebook and Instagram and all these apps and YouTube, and they're learning from these platforms, and they realize that they better be out there putting content out there.
I'm seeing trainees that are just coming out of their apprenticeships now that weren't the best trainees for going through the system, to put it
Sure.
nicely, but are doing great jobs on social media, and they aren't afraid to put themselves in front of a camera and just put their coaching information out there. And I think that's a great thing. If it isn't perfect to start with, so be it. Just start getting it out there. It's a brave thing to do, but it's a cool thing to do.
Yeah, that old concept of just documenting what you do and just putting yourself out there. I think you can actually learn as much from what you put out there that you might look back in a few years and cringe at, as opposed to trying to make something perfect that at the end of the day doesn't really exist, right? So much learning that can go on in just putting yourself out there all the time. And I would much rather see a young coach keep putting themselves out there, and I'll flick on and have a look and switch off and go, okay, I can see he's trying to figure it out, and then in 2 or 3 years' time go, oh shit, like he's really progressed, because I think that's the way that you do it, and I think people respect that. I think people respect the journey and
Yep.
and seeing it.
Completely agree. And
Yeah.
so getting onto that, putting yourself in front of a camera, I think you were probably close to the first Australian golf coach I kind of saw putting themselves out there online and putting decent quality online content together, whether it was YouTube videos or some sort of online ebooks and stuff. Talk me through that process of how you got to that conclusion that you should be starting to put your stuff out there.
Yeah, it actually all came back to the first conversation we had. My first mentor. When I finished working at that academy, I left, and I was really kind of the 2IC there. I was in charge of a lot of the programs and getting that, kind of building that brand, if you like. And I left that academy, around 2010 or around that time, and I left there with really no equity in there. There's no brand equity. It wasn't my academy, and essentially, I'd worked with some good players. I was teaching some good amateurs that were on their way, but essentially, no one really knew who I was. I didn't have my own website. There was none of that, and I thought, well, I made a mental switch in my mind. I said, okay, from this day, it doesn't matter who I work for, where I work, whether I stay in Australia or maybe I go overseas, it's US or Asia. I said I should always have my own identity. So I kind of made that mental switch all the way back then. And it was about that time I started my own website. I started blogging because blogging was cool back then, if you remember. I know you used to blog.
I've just started up again. I've just put a few more posts out there recently.
Yeah, and I'm not a great writer, but I mean, I enjoyed that process of blogging back then, because it was all that we did. So back then, I started my own website, just called it SG Golf Coaching, because I thought of myself as a golf coach, and I wanted to kind of portray that image out there, and I started doing some articles for some newspapers, because remember back then there was no Facebook, was just maybe just getting started. But yeah, there was certainly none of what we have now. There was YouTube, so I did start doing some YouTube, and I sucked at that, and I still suck at it. But I found blogging was really helpful. That actually got me some traction, and I made a concerted effort to blog every day. As we were kind of speaking off air, my brother-in-law, he's a photographer and he's an IT guy, so he'd take some photos for me. So my early foray into that would be some nice photos that I'd use for magazine articles, which I repurposed a lot over the years, and just blogging regularly on my website and starting like Facebook and YouTube.
I think I recall an IC Golf page that might have had your name on it. Ask
Absolutely.
Steve Coaching. So that was
Yeah.
kind of the big golf forum here in Australia. Was I Seek Golf, and
Yeah.
I think you were on there doing some coaching as well.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, even now, I mean, I've started doing a little bit of mentoring here. So some different coaches over the world. There's so much you can do before you try and maybe go big or think too big. It's so tough not to digress too much from the topic, but it's so tough to kind of put yourself out there in a YouTube and an Instagram world and kind of get these online students, which a lot of the coaches in all over the world have been trying to like push on, especially during this time. And the webinar that I did recently for the Australian PGA, I talked about low hanging fruit. I mean, there's so many forums and things like that you can kind of dip your toe into, and students are desperate and hungry for like free information. And at the end of the day, if you're not busy, you should be on these forums. And that was one of the things all the way back then that I thought, well, people are asking questions, whether it's a Golf WRX or it's an iSeek or in Malaysia or Singapore. There were forums when I first came over here, and I just dived right into them. I mean, that was where people were asking questions, and there was no other platforms to put your information out there apart from perhaps your own website, and a Facebook and a YouTube. And I thought they were really easy mediums to get in contact with people.
And great way to improve your skills, of course, as well. So
absolutely, yeah.
Spending your time putting content on those kind of sites, it's a great way to actually build your content writing skills. So as part of building that brand in Australia, you were seen there for a while as being the putting guru. I think you got into Aimpoint quite early on in Australia.
Absolutely.
So talk me through how you came across Aimpoint and how you got started down that path.
Yeah, so I started doing, after I left the academy, or it might have been around the time 2010, I started doing trips to Asia. And part of that was, my brain was thinking, okay, I'd like to have a go at Asia and look at a position there. And I thought the best thing is to start traveling there. And maybe for about 2 years, I was attending conferences in Asia. Some of them were business conferences. Some of them were coaching conferences in Thailand and Malaysia and different parts. I even presented at a conference over there in Thailand. But in one of the business management conferences, I met or heard Mark Sweeney present on Aimpoint. Just went up there. He talked about some hocus pocus Aimpoint, which was completely over my head. It was all very technical, and there was green mapping, and I was like, whoa. But obviously as a golf coach, I'm interested. So I got his card and contacted him and I said, and actually the catalyst, we hear this a lot, when you've got a problem, you're trying to find a solution to the problem. The problem I had was I was working with a very promising young amateur, had maybe just turned pro, named Stacey Keating, and she just sucked at green reading. And it was so frustrating to me because it was the best part of my game. And for the life of me as a young coach, I couldn't get her to see what I saw. I couldn't get her to feel, what I felt and what I knew was going to work on the greens. Didn't, all the drills. And then when I heard from Mark, I'm like, well, maybe this could help. It's a different approach. So, I jumped on a plane, flew to Orlando, spent a couple of $1,000 learning from Mark and Jamie at the time. I did that for 2 days, come away, and I thought, geez, like, I don't know if I'm any better. It was a lot of cool information, but I'd say slightly unusable. But I applied some of what, I'd learnt there to Stacey's caddy at the time, who was her boyfriend, now became her husband. And it helped. Like, it helped a lot. And, the cool thing with Aimpoint, it just kept evolving. It got easier. It got more simple. Back when I was still in Australia, we were still using a chart, and we were using a read called a midpoint read, but that definitely helped. And so the actual reason why I did it was to help one student. That's the reason why I did it. And ultimately, when I did make the move to Asia, Aimpoint started evolving more. The Express read came along, and it really kind of exploded as, in and of itself. as something that became very like mainstream, if you like, across, pros were wanting to learn it. And, I had all sorts of coaches wanting to get trained up at that point. So that was kind of a bit of how that had evolved over maybe like a 3-year window.
I'm curious to touch on a point you made about halfway through there about teaching Stacey how to see what you saw as a putter. And I know if someone asked me how to read greens, I don't know how to coach it because
Right.
you just kind of see where the slope is as a player. You've evolved it over 20 years of playing golf.
Yeah.
So when a student asks you, how do you read greens? You just kind of go, well, you see the slope and you aim it up the slope and away you
Yeah.
go. So it is a challenge, and that's probably why I, as a putting coach, haven't been a very strong putting coach throughout my career. I generally stick with full swing and short game and don't teach a whole lot of putting, tend to send most other people. But as you said, with Aimpoint, it gives you a structure, and it was a very complicated system early on. And I haven't had the pleasure yet of going through an Aimpoint Express class, but it just looks so much simpler for players now to feel that slope and then to use the guidelines, and off they go.
Yeah, absolutely. And just I mean, from that standpoint, it became something very easy to teach, and it was something that I've been through the whole evolution of Aimpoint, being one of the first instructors, probably the first handful of instructors in the world, but definitely the first instructor in Australia and the first in Asia, and ultimately became the head guy in Asia just because I'd been around it for so long and spent so much time with Mark and Jamie. But yeah, it's definitely now a very usable system. And I had two sisters I taught, just gave them 30 minutes of it yesterday, and it's 11 and 13. It's so you could teach it at any age, and it's very uncomplicated now in that respect.
Well, with the Aimpoint Express, didn't it it came about due to the fact that they were trying to teach Aimpoint to kids? Isn't that where it kind of came from?
Yeah, so the original chart read, Mark was about to board a plane to go to some part of the US, and a coach said, we've got a class with 10 kids. We can't use the chart. What are we going to do? And they came up with the idea that they would just simply stand behind the ball. Could the kid feel it to the left or to the right? They could. And they would just put a thumb up on either the right or left-hand side of the hole and aim just right or left of the thumb, like super simple. Stand behind the ball, slope feels to the left, we put a thumb on the right side of the hole, we just putt to the right side. So that was the initial express read. And then, one thumb became a finger relating to 1%, and then 2 became 2 fingers, and 3 became 3. And with a lot of refinement over the years, we came up with this express read, and it evolved very, very fast. Adam Scott, I believe they first played around with this idea in December. And I remember getting an email from Mark, who was about to land in KL. And we had all these classes booked with these charts, and he said, we're not doing the chart. And I'm like, what do you mean we're not doing the chart, So that was the first time. That was in December. And in April the next year, Adam Scott used that in the US Masters, and it just went absolutely crazy for, it felt like about 3 years that all we were doing was Aimpoint Express classes all over Asia.
That's cool. And again, it just shows how quickly things can evolve, and that arguably just made Aimpoint, as you said, it just brought it out to the front of everybody because they could see it, how these people were doing stuff. Because if people were flicking through the actual Aimpoint books, players would just assume that they're just doing what they would do out on the fairway. But holding up the hands like that, it's like, this is something different. What's he doing? So you can certainly improve it.
There's very few innovators, I guess, in golf. I mean, there's very few. Mark is definitely one of them. I mean, he's a pretty cool guy, and he's very smart. I mean, a very, very smart guy. Yeah, the back end of his stuff is, I mean, it would blow you and me away.
Just to come up with that chart, that must have taken him so much time and so much study and so much hitting putts and rolling balls on greens to find out how that chart actually works. That's it's pretty cool.
Well, that's the thing. It's all math. It's all calculated math based on a planar green, and I can't go into all that stuff, but it's thousands and thousands of lines of algorithms, and out pops the chart. So yeah, there's definitely science behind it. A lot of math and a lot of science, and I think the coaches have helped to develop into something that's actually teachable.
Yeah,
because he's not a coach.
Now, one thing that is I've always admired about you as a coach is your thirst to understand and learn new things. So every time I speak to you or see you, you've spent time with coaches, you've spent time with other people from other areas, and you're always picking up brand new. Can you talk through some of the people you spent time with over the years, apart from those guys early on that you were?
Yeah.
So after you've got your basic understanding, who are some of the guys you spent time with that have evolved your coaching?
Yeah, so from a short game standpoint, or even putting, obviously Mark and Jamie were huge influences for Aimpoint. I mentioned Jamie Donaldson; he's the head guy in Europe, and really, just an amazing coach, and is a great putting coach. So, Phil Kenyon, who you obviously would have heard of, he was coming out to Thailand 6-7 years ago, and he'd run his program there, and I kind of sucked as a putting coach, no doubt. I knew Aimpoint, but I didn't know a lot of the other stuff. So it was great learning from Phil. We brought him over to Australia. I think you might remember that a few years back as well. So I was able to travel with him there. And he was just great. He's just his depth of knowledge in that part, because he's purely a putting coach, is kind of second to none. So he's been a great resource. I guess over the years as well, I've invited a lot of coaches over to Asia. I've run some small seminars. I've invited Dr. Kwan over to Asia, which was pretty tough. His stuff runs pretty deep. I wouldn't say that I use his stuff in that respect. I wouldn't say his information is overly usable. It just gives you more of an understanding of certain things. I invited Andy Plummer, who's founder of the Stack and Tilt, an amazing, smart guy who's extremely generous with his time and his knowledge, and learned so much from him. It's when I talk about Andy and what he presents and what he offers, I think certainly for myself and a lot of other coaches, they help to fit a lot of the stuff that we've learned over the years into kind of very usable information. I'd gathered up all this stuff over the years from different pros and some of those ones I'd mentioned over the years, but it was all kind of just stuff that was, that I'd heard. Okay, well, we turn this way, and when the wrists do this, or the wrist cock, or the wrist. But when you kind of go through that process, you learn a lot more about how the body moves in 3 dimensions. You learn more specifically about how wrists and whatnot. And anyone that's done any MORAD training, which is really where Andy's background came from, which is the Mac O'Grady stuff, would appreciate as well. What I'm talking about. So it just helps a lot of this information that we hear over the years kind of fit. How does that fit? How can you use that part with a student or not use that part? So that's what it really helped me to do. It helped me to organize my thoughts a lot more with my lesson. It gave me a little bit of a system around how I would handle a student. If they're having issues with contact or distance or direction control. So he's definitely been an influence, and some of the coaches around him, Andreas Carli, who's become a very good friend of mine. I use as a sounding board, and find him very helpful as well. But there's so many great coaches, knowledgeable coaches, which we see online now. Whether you're looking at a Scott Cowks or I'm gonna kind of slip his name, or it's Dana. Trying to think, Radar. I forgot his first name here. I think it's Radar Pro. Do you know his
Yeah, Daniel Dalquist.
Jeff Smith.
Oh,
Yeah, Jeff Smith.
Jeff. Oh,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
Jeff Smith. George Gankas. It's hard not to see what he does and at least appreciate it. So there's so many knowledgeable coaches out there that we can kind of pick bits from to help our students, and that's kind of what I've tried to do over the years. Just tried to understand, and sometimes if I get a student which has a problem in a particular area, I'm able to kind of sift through and know exactly the direction I would head down to help them, and not just from a full swing standpoint as well. I've been able to invited James Seekman over to Asia a few years ago. I spent some time with James Ridyard in Orlando, who's a short game coach. You've probably heard of him. So, yeah, short game's an area that I've really wanted to dive into over the years. It's certainly an area you can help students, fast track scoring, and I've just tried to make myself as well rounded as possible, and try and seek out these guys who I feel are doing it, maybe a little bit better, or at least they're putting themselves out there a little bit more than some other coaches to learn from.
It seems like coaches these days more, as you said, they've got more structure to their coaching. They've got more setups and plans and things in place to give them a guidelines for how they would coach certain players standing in front of them. And I think that's where I think coaching's improved. I think you don't have a system, so to speak, but you have a roadmap. We would probably call it, would probably be a good enough word, that you've got some rough outline of where you would go with certain players based on the things that you're seeing in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would completely agree. I would happily use the word system, because I think if you look at a system, it's kind of broad in nature, and it can go very narrow. When you've got a beginner golfer standing in front of you, if you don't have a structure in your head about how you're going to help them, it can be a really, really tough road, especially when you're doing it online. When you've got a tour pro in front of you that's had 20 years of experience, you have to work more within their framework. But I would still argue you have a system around, if the ball's doing too much of this or not enough of that, you would still have a plan, whether you want to call it a roadmap or a system about, okay, if I move the ball position here, or if I adjust the club face here, or if I make, a small tweak to how their body moves, it should affect, this. So that to me is still a system, but it's a much softer version for that particular player.
Yeah, I would tend to be on the same page there. I think if a coach classes himself that he doesn't have a system, he still has some sort of idea of how he's going to go about it. There is
without a doubt.
Yeah. So I think as coaches, we've all got a system to some degree. So that's really cool. Okay, so how did you end up where you are now? So tell everyone out there where you're based at the moment.
Yes, I've been based out of Malaysia, and the capital city here is Kuala Lumpur, which I'm sure everyone's heard of that. 10 years it's been, or coming up to 10 years, actually it's about 9 years. And I guess my decision was probably made when I left the academy I mentioned I worked for in Australia, and I'd been lucky enough to work with different groups of Asian students over the years, Korea, Malaysia, some from Thailand, and I'd kind of made a decision that, okay, that's where I want to have a go at teaching over there. I kind of feel like I'd exhausted everything in Australia from a coaching standpoint. I worked with some great players who I was still working with, some amateurs that had turned pro, but I kind of felt like I was a bit stale there. And
so after spending time in Asia, because I spent some time in Taiwan and China when I was coaching, and the good part about that part of the world is everything's so close together. It's very easy to get to nearby countries, very short flights. You can jump on and you can spend some time doing coaching in other places, which I think you do really well. So how, again, did that play any sort of role in or any sort of in your choice of heading towards that space, that you had access to more golfers?
Not at all. My thought process is I'm going to move to Malaysia and I'm going to work at the club, which I'm actually still at now, and I'm going to be there 6 days a week, and I'm going to do 8 hours a day. That was my initial goal, just to get busy in a place. I had no intention. I didn't even think about that I'm going to go to a different country and ever teach there. It just wasn't in my thought process. What was in my thought process to give it a red hot go in Malaysia and give myself 2 years to really put myself out there. What did help me was the fact that I was an Aimpoint instructor, and I was blogging pretty heavily about Aimpoint in Australia, and I kept blogging about it along with other things. And, I remember I had one email come across from a guy in Vietnam that said, "Oh, we heard you're an Aimpoint instructor. I want to invite you to teach 10 of my friends." I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. So I jumped on a plane, went over there with my charts, and away I went. It was a great experience. And then Andrew Welsford, you probably know, he was a national coach in Singapore. And I'm like, gee, Singapore's like literally 4-hour drive for me to get there. It's a 45-minute plane flight. So, I got in contact with Andrew somehow, or it might have even been Brad McManus at the time, who's a good buddy of mine. I'm like, I teach this thing called Aimpoint. Do you think I can come over and, maybe do some classes? And Andrew was like, yeah, come and teach like our national team. I'm like, perfect. And so I got on the forum there in Singapore, and I said I'm an Aimpoint guy, or I might have put one of my blogs up, and, I had like 6 people or something. So that was kind of the beginning of me traveling. It was actually more through Aimpoint. And because I could probably say I might have visited between that 2 years, 10 different countries, and there were some coaches that were getting trained up. So I flew to Korea and trained up a coach. So that was kind of my early travel, was actually through Aimpoint, which then turned into some short game schools, which then turned into doing some trips to India, because I had some students come over from India. I had success with a young amateur, and people kind of started to travel to Malaysia, some Indian students, and that then allowed me to travel to India to start to work with some of them. So that part kind of evolved as well.
So how many countries do you actually travel to at the moment? How many countries do you actually get to?
I mean, it could be 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say countries that I've narrowed down now, and I think I'm a lot more focused probably on just 3. If you include Malaysia, it would be India, because I've now started an academy there. I've become director of golf for an academy there, so I'll be doing more regular trips there. And probably Singapore would be the other one, because it's so close. But I do 3 or 4 to Thailand a year, same to China, a couple to Indonesia. But a lot of those I will cut back on now and just kind of narrow it down quite a bit, I would say. I'd go to South Korea a few times a year, but they're more just kind of get invited to go there for 3-4 days.
So how do you structure the coaching over there? Obviously you've got contacts in each country, and you set up a time to go for a certain period of time and coach over there? Do you just charge a set fee up front, or do you charge each individual client? Have does it work?
Yeah, pretty much. I've got contacts with different facilities in those different countries. Some I've got really good arrangements with. Some would be sort of fairly standard arrangement where they take a percentage. And because I've got enough students in those countries, I would just ahead of time say, I'm coming over. This is my 4-day window. In India, it's normally much longer trips. It'll be kind of 10 days. And my students would just block out my hours, basically. So very rarely, it's different when I go to China, because I get invited over there by a friend of mine named Michael Dickey at his academy, where he'll organise the golf schools. And, I might do a day's training with his staff, and we just, we come up with an arrangement there on fees. But generally it's me organising everything myself.
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. How do you set your coaching up where you are at the moment? You are like a private golf coaching session where they pay per hour? Do you set up coaching programs? How do you set your coaching up at the moment?
It's pretty standard. I mean, it's mostly by hour to 2 hour blocks that most students would book me in. I have a practice group that I'm running as well for a group of elite players. So I do that twice a week in Malaysia. That's probably the only group stuff that I do. Most of it is kind of one-to-one. Yeah, so it's pretty standard.
So you charge them per hour. You don't charge
I
like
do.
a subscription. There's a few coaches going towards that
Yeah.
subscription based idea of
I
coaching.
I haven't, purely because of how much travel I've done in the past, and it just, because I'm not at one facility, or I haven't been at one facility, it hadn't made sense for me to do that. Charging a monthly subscription and then saying I'm going away for 2 weeks is not not a thing I think people would buy into.
That doesn't
Uh,
go down so well. No.
no, so yeah, my model is a fairly old traditional, like, per hour model. I can kind of come and go as I please. I can do my online stuff, and students still get to see me, and it's been good the last few months. And we're not going to be able to travel here in Malaysia until next year anyway, so it allows me to kind of really settle in there, and maybe even run a few programs with some of my better players, which I normally wouldn't do, just because I haven't got the time, because if I'm traveling, for example.
Yeah, COVID certainly has thrown a spanner in the works. I can't see us getting on planes anytime
No.
soon. I think we're looking at least till halfway through next year before we start to get anywhere
Mm.
back to normal. It's crazy times. We're in stage 4 here at the moment in Victoria, so we can't go out of the house for any more than an hour a day. So
Yeah, it's crazy.
we're doing it pretty tough. But that kind of moves me into remote coaching, because you do that
Yeah.
really well. And you see your stuff that you put online about coaching online, and I think it's something you've done and set up really, really well. So talk me through, A, how you got into that space, and B, how you've improved it and expanded it in these weird times we're in at the moment.
Yeah, so getting into it was really just a demand thing. I'd had enough DMs through my Instagram of people asking me, and I decided I shouldn't reject them anymore. Probably for 6 or 8 months, I said, I don't do it, I don't do it. And then, Baden from Skillers had reached out to me, and he said, I've got this platform, get on. And I'm like, no, I don't do that. There's no value in it. And so I also rejected him for about 6 months. And then he finally, I finally decided to get on, and started that process. It could be 3+ years ago now. I can't remember. I probably, like a lot of pros, I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really feel there was a benefit. When, and you can appreciate this, and I'm sure a lot of the coaches listening, when you're so busy and you're already doing, your 40+ hours a week teaching, charging someone $50 or $30, and spending that amount, I just didn't really see any value in it for me or them. I didn't really see how they could learn. So, but I did start in that platform, and I think I started, like a lot of coaches, I had a formula. Okay, I'd analyze their swing. I'd give them a couple of points to focus on, in a separate tutorial. So that's basically what I would get, and that's pretty much what I did. Things definitely changed with COVID. I was doing a small amount of online coaching before that. It was maybe like 10% of my business. But just a nice amount. Oh, okay, yeah, that's nice. Every month there's some extra money coming in, if you like. So yeah, when COVID kicked in, it really made me rethink everything, like I think it did with a lot of coaches. And I would say not straight away, but it definitely got more socially accepted, or it has been more socially accepted during this time, for people to learn remotely. So, and like yourself, during this time, it's like, well, what do I do? So I looked at a couple of guys who I thought were doing it really well, and took some of what they were doing and mapped it out onto my website. That's the first thing I did. So I quickly, on the main page of my website, make sure that it was very prominent that I offered remote coaching, and just structured a little bit of a model around that. I then started. I did a little bit of soft promotion on my Instagram and sort of through my social media channels and email marketing, and I had a number of students come on board for that. The slight benefit for me is because I do have so many international students, I was able to offer them, a monthly plan, and quite a few of them took that up when they were able to hit balls, where they come out of kind of their lockdown. So, a lot of my students are already my students remotely, and the rest have just come through, the promotion and I think just general interest for remote coaching and the fact that I guess I put myself out there enough that people are aware of what I do and maybe want to try me out. But the biggest evolution for me is 95% of my students now do a monthly or a quarterly plan. There's almost no one-to-one lessons. And I try and service that by giving them above and beyond what they would get in a normal lesson, which means, additional videos on core strategy, very regular feedback, 2 to 3 times a week. They can get feedback from me. And I'd say kind of everything's very personalized, what I do. So all my videos are personalized. I rarely repurpose a video for them. I would always get in front of my sort of home studio here that I've put together and, just do a 5-minute video and say, we need to clean this up, or please work a little bit more on this, or it might be an audio note or a Zoom call. So yeah, I've tried to structure it so they get a sense that they're getting more than they might even get in an hour lesson. And they have, for some students, it's been very helpful because they get a lot more regular contact with me. Even more so than they might be able to if they're seeing me face to face and I'm traveling.
I think that's so true, and it's changed over time because I'm certainly in your camp early on. I don't see the value for a student in getting a 10-minute online golf lesson. How can we tell that they're doing it properly? How can we tell that they're actually understanding what we're sending across to them? I probably tie it into coaching indoors. Like I wouldn't dream even 10 years ago of ever coaching indoors. I thought, no, you have to see ball flight. You have to be able to be outside and see where the ball's going. But with the advent of obviously TrackMan and Foresight and FlightScope and these type of tools, we can coach indoors now and get ball flight. And that coaching tech is improving all the time. So I think online coaching is certainly taking that change as well, I think. So very cool.
Just a quick story. I know you want to ask me a few other questions, but a quick story. I was working with a student of mine from Indonesia. He used to travel to Singapore because it's very close. And when he first started, he's probably shooting around 95 to 100. Someone who's got some good speed there and a young guy, but just very, unstructured in how he moves and, doesn't really understand the game so well from a short game strategy standpoint. So, he used to, every time I was in Singapore, he'd often come down, and that might be like 6 times a year, for example. We did some good work, and he was slowly improving. He got down to scoring around 90. And he said, he called out to me maybe in the second month of COVID, and he said, hey, coach, what's the deal with the online? I said, well, this is how it works. We'll do a monthly plan. So we did that, and it went pretty well. We did mainly sort of swing stuff. We touched on some short game, and, he'd improved. He'd certainly improved his ball striking, but, his scores were kind of around there, around the same. And it was nearing to the end of the month, and he said, it's been good. Is there anything else that you think we can work on? I'm probably not going to continue. And I said, well, there's some different things that we could do on short game, and we could go through some core strategy videos, etc. And he said, okay, let's do 3 months. So I'm like, oh, that was pretty cool. And it was one of the first students that had done 3 months. I'm like, oh, this is great. So, I'd put together a bunch of core strategy videos. And at that time, I'd really started refining what I was doing. So I've got evaluation sheets for putting. I've got evaluation sheets for short game. I've got these core strategy videos where they have to watch them and send me back notes. And so we did this for about 2 or 3 weeks. And, he broke 80 for the first time. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. And then about, a week later, he shoots 77. And about a week later after that, he shoots par.
Wow.
And literally we hadn't done anything else. We'd just gone through core strategy. We've done some short game evaluations with him. Every time he uses an app called Grint, where he fills in his stats, which would be like golf shot or whatnot, and he'd be sending me, after he finished every round, he had to do a little reflection. What are the things he did well? So we just kind of got him to the habit of creating some awareness, and so these are some of the things that I've evolved. And I really don't think that if he was seeing me in person for once every 2 months, he would be at the level that he is right now. And he regularly breaks 80. He still shoots an 88, but he's probably got his scoring average around the low 80s now. But if he plays 5 rounds, he'd probably break 80 2 times. He's still a little bit inconsistent. So that's been a really interesting progression. In one particular case, working with him remotely, and we're about 2 months into his 3 months.
That's really cool. Do you think if that person was in front of you face to face, they would want to work solely on technique as opposed to that core strategy type stuff that you had to go down because you couldn't do the technique stuff?
Yeah, well, we did go on golf course with him. I remember going on the golf course with him in Singapore, but you just can't quite get as much done. Do you know what I mean? Like, you still can't get everything you want done, whereas he can watch a video, 3 or 4 times, really understand it, versus, that time on the golf course. I mean, reality is if you spend 2 hours with him on the golf course, you're probably only giving him 20 minutes of, information that they can take away, whereas they can watch a video series and chip away at those over a little bit longer period of time.
I think that's cool, and I think a great strategy for, say, even a coach in Australia, someone just starting out, to do like a seminar series at their club, get in front of the golfers and put them on in the clubhouse and say, I'm going to talk to you for every week for a half hour or 45 minutes, and we're going to talk about core strategy, and then you can go and apply that in your game. And if the average golfer can't take half a dozen shots off their round just by playing smarter, I'll go jump. So that's really cool.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, on the online coaching space, there's a certain student of yours that has been popping up in your Instagram feed, and that has made some pretty significant changes over a very short period of time. I'm hearing comments about, is this fair income or not? Is this real? Talk me through what she's done and how you came about starting to work with her.
Yeah, so it kind of came about really through...
Actually, just tell them who she is first before we get too much detail.
So Mia Baker, who you're referring to, is a young lady from England in her mid-20s, very savvy businesswoman, very busy lady, and just started golf kind of late last year. I got introduced for her effectively through Baden from Skillers, who said, there's this young girl, she seems very passionate, and let's go on a bit of a social experiment with her and just work with her remotely and see if we can't help her with her game. And there was a number of coaches I think he was looking at, and ultimately, he went with me to kind of help her. So that's been happening. We did 3 pretty aggressive months, I would say, because it was during lockdown. There was certainly a lot more time. The last month and a half, it's been a little bit softer. She's moved. She started playing golf, and it's been a little bit harder. But but the first, so her background, she started golf in November, a raw beginner. She'd done maybe 1 lesson, and she just kind of practiced a little bit on her own with her kind of boyfriend. And we started in sort of late March. And to give you context, and I know some people, is it real or whatever, about a month or so after working with her, she was still missing the ball. So we spoke off air about, sometimes we post all the good bits and everything seems nice. But she was, I remember she sent me some videos and she was missing the ball. No big deal for me because the movement was what I wanted. She didn't have the awareness of where the ball is. And I also posted something just a few weeks ago of a driver session we had where, for the first 30 minutes, she literally couldn't get the driver off the ground. I mean, the best was she was hitting like the bottom edge, or the toe and all sort of crazy stuff. So she's definitely a beginner. She has an ability to frustratingly change her pattern when you think that you've got them, which is very typical of a beginner, right? So I'm very cautious now with what information I give her because she is starting to stabilize. But the process is, it's been a learning process for me as well, but one which I like to follow with beginners, which is, teaching them basic hand-arm coordination exercises until I feel that they really can nail it down. Teaching them, basic body motion exercises where they have to complete at home in a dry drill. And the benefit, and I feel like the reason why she's able to progress, one, she's able to pick up on what I say fairly easily, although the frustrations are still there. The iterations that we have 3 to 4 times per week, or sometimes even 5 times per week when we first started, meant that she wasn't really doing anything that got too far out of control, out of what I thought would be normal. Whereas in a normal beginner lesson, okay, we work with them for 1 hour, we see them in 2 weeks or in 1 week or sometimes in a month, and there's zero progress because they've forgotten everything, perhaps. So from that standpoint, I've kept a very close eye on her progress. And I think that's been the main reason why we're able to keep some structure around what she does and make a fairly significant change. But yeah, it's all for real.
No, that's good.
And it's still a struggle from both ends for sure. And she's only 4.5 months in, so I think she'll be a good little golfer. Coming into 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, it'd be interesting to see her progress.
Yeah, I certainly think you're right. She's got some talent there. She can certainly swing that club quite well early on. So
Yeah.
I think you're doing some good things with her.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mate, I've kept you way too long this morning. I certainly appreciate you coming in and talking to me. As always, I could talk to you for hours. I certainly love picking your brain and going through your ideas. It gets me excited to coach. It gets me excited to get out there again. But there's a few questions I'd like to ask everybody that comes on the podcast. So just like to get those to you. So what tips and advice do you have for coaches starting out in our industry?
Tips. My brain really just goes to the upskilling, which I think is like super important at any level. And that's really the main advice I would give like a new coach, keep upskilling. Don't be afraid to seek out coaches that are at a higher level than you and just sit on a deck chair and watch them teach. I still feel, for me personally, that's the best way I learn. If you can get a mentor and if you're able to kind of watch other coaches do their thing, I think that's the fastest way to improve your skills.
It's certainly heaps easier to do these days as well. You don't need to spend $5,000 on a flight to go to the US to spend time with coaches. You can access their information pretty easily these days through social media.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty cool. So any tips for the golfers out there? Hopefully there's a few golfers paying attention or a few players out there paying attention to this podcast. So any advice for them?
Yeah, seek out the coach that you have trust in, or a coach that you have trust in, and figure out the 1 or 2 key areas that are going to help you to grow and improve. I think just so many golfers head down the wrong pathway of what they think they need. And I'm not even talking about like full swing here. It could be an improvement in how they manage themselves on the course. It could be an improvement in how they think. It could be Vision 54. It could be, a short game area that they really struggle with from 10 to 30 yards. It keeps holding them back. But it's often very hard for them to figure that out on their own. So I'd say try and seek out that exact advice, if you like, from a knowledgeable coach.
Extremely important to have that trust, I think, in that person that you're taking that advice from. So having that connection with the person, I think, is extremely important. You've obviously had a very varied career, and you've shifted around and moved to different places and done all sorts of exciting things. Is there anything that you would change in your career that you would do differently if you had your time over again?
That's a great question.
Because I know I would. There's certain things that I would change as a coach. So is there anything that you would change?
I mean, if there's one thing I would probably tell myself to do things earlier. because and this is maybe just me personally, sometimes you think, okay, I want to do that, and then you don't do it straight away. It takes you 6 months, or you end up doing it like 2 years later. And, I feel like I have done a lot of things over the years, but I would just tell myself to do it now. Like if I have a thought, do it now. Like you're doing a podcast, you might have thought about this for like 2 years ago, but you should have done it 2 years ago. Like that would be my advice.
Yeah, completely agree.
Do not wait.
There's a great quote up there saying, "Start before you're ready," and I think that is
Love it.
important. Just get it going, and you'll screw it up to start with. And I'm sure in 12 months' time, I'll go back to those first couple of podcast episodes and say, "How crap is that audio? Or how bad is this? Or how bad was that question?" And just get started. Awesome advice.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can answer this both ways, or one way, or in 5 years' time, where do you see yourself, and where do you see the golf industry in 5 years' time?
Oh, that's a good question as well. Golf industry is tough because I think that's largely to do with like the demographic that you're in, etc. But I see myself in Asia still for sure. Perhaps I've got something that's more personalized within myself, as in like having my own brand, my own setup for sure. I see that as a progression. I think the golf industry is going to continue to grow. I think the speed evolution is real. I think remote coaching is very real. I think that space is just going to be so interesting when we get cleaner technology to do remote coaching. I think that can keep evolving, and I think there's going to be a lot more coaches that have their home studios and can do really cool stuff remotely, without a doubt. But yeah, those are a couple of things I think are going to be happening.
That's really cool. Steve, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you online if they're after getting in contact with you?
So my website is just sggc.com.au. And Instagram is probably the one that I get DM'd the most. So it's just the same. It's just SG Golf Coaching on my name, Steven Giuliano, which is a bit tricky to spell, but figure it out.
I will certainly put them into the show details so people can get in touch with you if they need to, and certainly encourage you. You're a good follow on social media. There's plenty of good content out there. So again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and we'll definitely catch up soon.
Pleasure, bud. And shameless plug, I've got some, hopefully in the not too distant future, some more interesting content for students and coaches that they can kind of learn a little bit more about what I do, some education stuff. So working hard to get some of that together as well.
Awesome. So hopefully once you've got that up and going, we can get you on the show again. We can talk through that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, mate. Sounds good.
Cool. All right,
thanks so much.
Have a good one.